Hello and welcome back to the drag and drop inventory tutorial for Ren'Py part 6, and let's just jump straight back into it, shall we? So in the last part of the tutorial we finished creating our drag and drop functionality, and we also made it possible to combine two items in the inventory, which is namely the matches and the lantern. In this part of the tutorial we're going to make it possible to combine an inventory item together with an environment item. So to do that, we're going to create a new line underneath this character say function call, and then we're going to go inwards 3 times in the indentations. So 1, 2, 3, like so. So now we are in the same indentation as the second for loop. And here we're going to check if we did not have 2 inventory items being combined. And to do that, we're going to check if the iCombine variable is set to false. So we're going to say if iCombine is equal to false. So if this if statement is true, that the iCombine variable is false, then we know that we did not have 2 inventory items being combined. And in such a case, we want to instead check if the inventory item that we are dragging around on the screen, which is item 1, is overlapping an environment item instead. So for that, we're going to create a new for loop. So we're going to say for item 3 in environment sprites, like so. And now we're going to create the items overlap variable again, and then check with the check items overlap function if item 1 and item 3 are overlapping. So we're going to say items overlap is equal to check items overlap, and then we're going to pass in item 1 and item 3 as the parameters. And then we're going to say if items overlap is equal to true, then we are first of all going to set our IE overlap variable to true, because now we know that we have 2 items that are overlapping, which is the item that we are dragging around from the inventory and an item in the environment. So we're going to say IE overlap is equal to true, like so. And now we're going to check which 2 of these items that are overlapping. And for this tutorial we can have 4 items being combined. 2 of them is the key and the box, and the other 2 is the secateur and the door vines. So the first set that we can check for is going to be the key and the box. So we're going to say if item 1.type is equal to key and item 3.type is equal to box, like so. So now if the user is combining the key and the box, then we're going to allow the box to be opened. So the first thing we're going to do is to discard the key and the box from the inventory and the environment. So for that we're going to say remove inventory item, and then we're going to pass in the key, which is item 1, like so. And then we're going to say remove environment item, and then we're going to pass in item 3 as the parameter for that function. So now that we have done that, we're going to make sure that we are adding the contents of the box into the user's inventory. And those items are going to be the matches and the secateur. So we're going to use our add to inventory function to do that. So we're going to say add to inventory, and then we're going to add a list of items that we're going to add to the inventory. So I'm going to add 2 square brackets, like so. And then we're going to say secateur and matches, like so. And then we want to show the user on the screen that they have gotten the secateur and the matches. So we're going to say Ren'Py dot show screen, and we're going to show the inspect item screen to do that. So we're going to say inspect item, like so. And then we're going to pass in the items that we want to inspect. So we're going to add a list again, like so. And then we're going to say secateur and matches, like so. And now we also want our character to say something about picking these items up. So we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to say character say who is equal to clear and what is equal to, and then we can have her say something like this tool might come in handy And then we're going to create a second piece of dialogue. So I'm going to add a comma after that. And then we're going to say, but for what? Like so. And now we also need to pass in the inspect item parameter again to this character say function. So we're going to say inspect item is equal to true, like so. And now we're going to make sure that we are redrawing the inventory sprite manager as well as the environment sprite manager, as we have made changes to them. So we're going to say inventory sm.redraw, like so. And then we'll do the environment sprite manager as well. So I'll duplicate that, and then I'm going to rename this to environment, like so. And then we're also going to restart the interaction and then break the loop. So we're going to say Ren'Py.restart interaction and then break, like so. And now we're going to create the next if statement, which is going to check if the user is trying to combine the secateurs and the door vines. So we're going to say elif item1.type is equal to secateur and item3.type is equal to door vines, like so. And in such a case, we're going to make sure that we are removing the secateur and the door vines from the inventory and the environment. So we're going to say remove inventory item, and then we're going to pass in item 1 as the parameter, and then we're going to do the environment. So we're going to say remove environment item, and then pass in item 3 as the parameter, like so. And then we're going to have a character to say something about the door being openable now. So we're going to say character say who is equal to Claire and what is equal to, and then we can have her say something like I can open the door now, like so. And now we're going to do the same thing as before, namely we're going to redraw the inventory sprite manager as well as the environment sprite manager. So we're going to say inventory sm.redraw and then environment sm.redraw, like so. And then we're also going to restart the interaction and break this loop. So we're going to say Ren'Py.restart interaction and break. And now we're going to create an else statement, and this else statement is going to run as long as we don't have an inventory item and an environment item overlapping. And that else statement is going to work the same way as the one we have up here. So we can go ahead and copy that and then paste it underneath here, like so. So now that we have that done, we're also going to make sure that we are creating this remove inventory item function, as we haven't done that yet. But since this function is going to behave much like our remove environment item function, we're going to go ahead and copy paste that and then change it to work for the inventory instead. So let's go ahead and scroll down until we find it right here. So I'm going to go ahead and select the whole function like so, and then duplicate it, and then we're going to rename it to remove inventory item, like so. And then we're going to change the variable names inside of here. So instead of environment, we're going to say inventory, and then we'll do the other ones as well, like so. And now we want to make sure that we are also repositioning each of the inventory items, as we have just deleted one of them. So we're going to say reposition inventory items, like so. And now we're going to scroll back up into the inventory events function right here. And in here, we're also going to make sure that we are breaking the loops after each of these else statements. So we're going to say break, and then we'll do the same thing down here, break, like so. And then the last thing we're going to do before we save our changes and launch the game to see what this looks like is to make sure that we are setting the IE combine variable to true inside of these if statements right here. So we're going to say IE combine is equal to true, and the same down here, i.e. combine is equal to true, like so. So now let's go ahead and save our changes and launch the game to see how this looks like. So now that we have the game up and running again, we're going to go ahead and first of all open up the inventory, and then we can add the key and the lantern, like so. And now we're going to try to see what happens if we try to open this box right here by using the key from our inventory. So I'm going to press on this hand symbol so that the key will follow the mouse, and I'm going to click on this box to see what happens. And as we can see, that seemed to work indeed, as we got 2 new items into our inventory, and that is the secateur and the matches. We can also see that the key was removed from the inventory as we have used it up. Then on the screen we can also see a larger image of one of the items that we just picked up, which is the secateur. And then if we click with the mouse, we can see the next item, which is the matches. And then if we click again, we get a piece of dialogue at the bottom of the screen where our character is saying that this tool might come in handy. And if we click again, the dialogue is progressed and we get the next piece of dialogue that says, but for what? And now if we click again, the dialogue goes away and we can continue with the game. But now instead of combining 2 items that we know works, such as the matches and the lantern and the secateur and the door vines, we're going to go ahead and try to combine 2 items that cannot be combined. And that is going to be an inventory item and an environment item. So let's go ahead and try to combine the matches and the door vines and see what happens. As we can see, we get a dialogue at the bottom of our screen that says, I can't open the door, there's some tough vines in the way. But that is actually not what we want to happen, because what happened here is that our game thought that we clicked on the vines without dragging an item around on the screen, and so our character was triggered to say that they can't open the door. What we want instead to happen is that our character should be saying that we can't combine those 2 items. So let's go back into the code and see how we can make that work. So before we go ahead and fix that issue, we are first of all going to make sure that we create another if statement inside of this function. And that if statement is going to check if I combine and IE combine is equal to false. And if that's true, then that means that we did not have 2 inventory items being combined, and we didn't either have an inventory item be combined with an environment item. And if that is true, then we're going to make sure that the item that we are dragging around on the screen is snapped back to its original position. So we're going to create a new line underneath here, and then we're going to go inwards in the indentations until we reach the same indentation as this if statement right here. So we're going to go inwards 1, 2, 3, 4 times, like so. And then we're going to say if I combine is equal to false and IE combine is equal to false, like so. And then we can go ahead and copy paste this section right here, which is snapping back the item to its original position in the inventory. So we're going to copy that, and then we're going to paste it inside of here, like so. Now in order to fix the issue where we have the wrong dialog triggering whenever we are trying to combine an inventory item with an environment item that cannot be combined, we're going to scroll back down into the environment events function. And it is this function that is causing the wrong dialog to be triggered due to the fact that this if statement right here is evaluated to true as our cursor is over one of the environment items as we are releasing the mouse button. And so when our cursor is over, for example, the door vines, and we are releasing the mouse button, then we have both the inventory events function triggering its code and this environment events function triggering its own code as well. So in order to prevent this conflict from happening, we're going to add an extra if statement to this function, which is going to check if I overlap or IE overlap is equal to false. And if that's true, then that means that if we are releasing the mouse button and we don't have 2 items overlapping, then that means that we are simply trying to click on one of these environment items. And then we want to make sure that these dialogues can be triggered. So we're going to go ahead and create a new if statement. And this if statement we can create after this for loop. So we're going to create a new line up here. And then we're going to say if I overlap is equal to false and IE overlap is equal to false, like so. And then we're going to make sure that we are indenting this section of code, like so. So now these dialogues and functions right here will not trigger as long as we have an overlap between 2 items that are triggered from inside of the inventory events function. but only if we don't have two items overlapping can the dialogues and these add to inventory functions be triggered. So now that we've fixed that, we're going to make sure that we are saving our changes, and then we're going to launch the game again to see if this works any better. So now we're going to do the same thing as we did before. So I'm first going to open up the inventory so that we can see the items being added to it. And then I'm going to add the key and the lantern. And now we can go ahead and try to combine the lantern and the door vines, for example, to see if we get the correct dialogue to be triggered. And as we can see, that does seem to work indeed, as we get our character to say that that doesn't seem to work instead of the other dialogue. So now we click again, and we get the next piece of dialogue that says, try something else. And then if we click again, the dialogue is closed. And now let's go ahead and open up the box again. And now we get the secateurs and the matches to the inventory. And then we can go ahead and lit the lantern. So I'm going to combine the matches and the lantern. And we get the lantern to be lit. And then we can open the door with the secateur. So now that we have that done, we're going to make sure that we go back inside of the code and implement some functionality for the buttons inside of the inventory, so that we can make sure that we can reveal more items in case we have more than can fit within the available slots. So let's go ahead and do that now. Now before we go ahead and add some code into our inventory arrows function, we're going to scroll back up into the add to inventory function right here. And in here we're going to create a new attribute for our inventory sprites. And this attribute we're going to call visible, and this one will help us to determine whether or not an inventory item should be visible or invisible. And that is because inside of our inventory we only have 7 available slots, so if we have more than 7 items we need to make sure that some of them stays hidden until we reveal them. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this line right here, like so, and then I'm going to rename this to visible, and this one should be set to true as a default. Like so. And now we can scroll back down into the inventory arrows function right here. Now the first thing we're going to do inside of this function is to make sure that we are making some of our variables into globals so that we can change them. And these variables are going to be inventory LB enabled and inventory RB enabled, as these determines whether or not the buttons should be enabled or disabled. So we're going to say global inventory LB enabled, and then we can duplicate this line and rename this one to inventory RB enabled, like so. And then we're going to create a few of the lines, like so. And now we're going to check if we happen to have more than 7 items in the inventory. And if that is the case, we also need to check if the user clicked on the right button or on the left button in the inventory. And if it happens to be the right button, then we're going to check if there are more items to the right of the last inventory slot. And if there are, then we're going to make sure that each of the inventory items shifts to the left by 1 step. But if it's a left button, then we're going to do the opposite by shifting each of the inventory items to the right instead. So the first thing we're going to do is to check if we happen to have more than 7 items in our inventory. So we're going to say if len inventory sprites is more than 7, like so. And now we're going to create a new local variable to this function, and this variable is going to help us to keep track of the current item in the for loop. And the reason why we need to create an extra variable for that is because the current item in the for loop is going to be determined with certain calculations, and I'm going to show you exactly why in a minute. But for now, let's go ahead and create this variable, and we're going to call it cItem, which stands for current item, and this one is going to be an empty string to start with, like so. And now we're going to create the for loop, which is going to iterate through each of the items in the inventory sprites list. So we're going to say for item in inventory sprites. But now we're also going to need to be able to tell which iteration we are currently in for this for loop. And to do that, we're going to make sure that we are enumerating the inventory sprites list. So we're going to say enumerate, like so. And then we're going to add an extra variable for this for loop, and this one we can call I, like so. And then inside of this for loop we're going to create another if statement, and this if statement is going to check if the button that the user pressed was the right button. So we're going to say if button is equal to right. And then we're also going to make sure that the right button can be clicked on. And to do that, we're going to check if inventory RB enabled is equal to true. So we're going to say and inventory RB enabled is equal to true, like so. And inside of here, we're going to create another if statement. And this if statement is going to check if the last item in the inventory sprites list is not visible, because then we know that we have at least one more item to the right of the last inventory slot in the inventory, and therefore we can allow each of the inventory sprites to shift to the left one step. So to do that, we're going to say if inventory sprites and then -1 inside of these two brackets to grab the last inventory item. And then we're going to say dot visible is equal to false, like so. And then we're going to make sure that we're shifting each of the inventory sprites to the left one step. So we're going to say item.x minus equals to item.width plus inventory slot padding, like so. And then we're going to set the cItem variable to contain the current item of the for loop. So we're going to say cItem is equal to item, like so. But now if the user instead clicked on the left button, then we're going to say elif button is equal to left and inventory LB enabled is equal to true. And then we're going to do the same thing inside of this if statement, and that is namely that we're going to check if the first item in the inventory sprites list is not visible, because if it's not, then we know that there's at least one more item before the first slot in the inventory that should be able to be revealed. So we're going to say if inventory sprites, and then we're going to add a 0 inside of these brackets like so to get the first inventory item, and then we're going to say dot visible is equal to false. So if that is true, then we're going to go ahead and shift each of the inventory sprites to the right one step. And to do that, we're actually going to need to create a new variable. In this variable, we're going to call reversed index, and it is going to contain the current iteration of this for loop, but in reverse. So to do that, we're going to say reversed index is equal to, and then we're going to create a set of brackets like so. And then instead of that, we're going to say len inventory sprites, and then instead of those brackets, we're going to say -1, and then instead of the last set of brackets, we're going to say -I, like so. So this is going to give us the reversed index value for the current iteration of this for loop. And now we want to grab the item inside of the inventory sprites list that has this reversed index position. So we're going to say inventory sprites, and then we're going to add the reversed index variable inside of these two brackets. So we're going to say reversed index, like so. And then we're going to say dot x plus equals item dot width divided by inventory slot padding, like so. So now each of the inventory items are going to shift to the right by one step. And now we're going to fill the cItem variable with this current item in the for loop. And to do that, we're going to say cItem is equal to inventory sprites reversed index, like so. So now that we've done that, we're going to go ahead and create another if statement. And this if statement is going to check if the x position of the current item in the for loop that resides inside of the cItem variable is less than the first inventory slot's x position, or if it's more than the last inventory slot's x position. And if either of those conditions are true, then that means that that item has just been moved out of view. So it means that it's either to the right of the last inventory slot or to the left of the first inventory slot. And in such a case, we want to make sure that we are setting that item to be invisible. So we're going to create a few empty lines, and then we're going to make sure that we are in the same indentation as these other if statements, like so. And then we're going to say if cItem is not equal to an empty string and a set of brackets, and then instead of those, we're going to say item dot x is less than inventory first slot x, which is the variable that we created earlier, which contains the first inventory slot's x position. And then we're going to say, or c item dot x is more than another set of brackets. And then we're going to create a calculation which is going to determine the position of the last inventory slot on the x-axis. So we're going to say inventory first slot x plus another set of brackets, like so, c item dot width times 7, like so. And then we're going to move to the right 2 steps, like so. And then we're going to say plus another set of brackets. And then we're going to say inventory slot padding times 5, like so. So if either of these conditions are true, then that means that we have either moved an item beyond the last inventory slot in the inventory or before the first one. So then we're going to make sure that we are creating a colon after this if statement, like so. And then inside of here, we're going to make sure that we are setting this item to be invisible as we have moved it out of view. And for that, we're actually going to create a new function, which we are going to call setItemVisibility. And this function we're going to reuse every time we want to toggle an item's visibility. So we're going to say setItemVisibility, and then we're going to add 2 parameters to this function. The first one is going to say which item we want to toggle the visibility for, and the other parameter is going to say if we want this item to be visible or to be invisible. So we're going to say item is equal to c item and visible is equal to false, like so. But now if none of these conditions are true, then that means that the item has gone into view instead of out of view. So then we're going to set it to visible instead. So for that, we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to say elif. And for this elif statement, we're going to add one condition, and that is c item is not equal to an empty string, like so. And the reason why we're checking if c item is not an empty string is because if the if statements inside the for loop ever evaluates to false, then the c item variable is never going to be filled with the correct item. And if we don't have access to the correct item, then we can't set its visibility. So this is just to help us to prevent any error messages from being shown. So now we're going to say setItemVisibility, and then we're going to pass in the 2 parameters, which is going to be item is equal to c item and visible is equal to true. Now the last thing we're going to do for this function is to make sure that we are toggling the inventory buttons to be enabled or disabled depending on if we have revealed all of the items to the right or to the left. So to do that, we're going to create a few empty lines, and then we're going to make sure that we are in the same indentation as the for loop. So we're going to go inwards 1, 2 times, like so. And then we're going to say if inventory sprites at the index position of -1, which will grab the last item in the inventory sprites list. And then we're going to say dot visible is equal to true, like so. So if the last item in our inventory is visible, then that means that we have no more items that can be revealed to the right. So now we're going to make sure that we are disabling the right inventory button. So we're going to say inventory RP enabled is equal to false, like so. But now if the last item is not visible, then we need to enable this button instead. So we're going to say else inventory RP enabled is equal to true. And then we're going to do the same thing for the left button. So we're going to go ahead and duplicate this section, like so. And then we're going to change the -1 to say 0 instead to pick the first item in the list. And then we're going to say inventory LB enabled, and the same down here, inventory LB enabled, like so. And then the very last thing we're going to do is to make sure that we are redrawing the inventory sprite manager as well as restarting the interaction. So we're going to create a few empty lines underneath here, and then make sure that we are in the same indentation as these other if statements, like so. And then we're going to say if c item is not equal to an empty string, and then we're going to say inventory sm.redraw, and then put a 0 instead of that. And then we're going to say Ren'Py.restart interaction, like so. So now that we have that done, we're going to go ahead and create this set item visibility, and we can do that underneath this inventory arrows function. So I'm going to go ahead and create a few of the lines underneath here, like so. And then we're going to make sure that we are in the correct indentation, like so. And then we are going to say def set item visibility, and then we're going to add the two parameters, which is item and visible, like so. And then instead of here, we're first of all going to check if the visible parameter has been set to false. So we're going to say if visible is equal to false, and if that is the case, then we're going to set the item that has been passed to this function through the item argument to be invisible. So we're going to say item dot visible is equal to false, and then we're going to create a transform which is truly going to set this item to be invisible, and this transform is going to make sure that the image for this sprite is going to have a 0% alpha. So we're going to say t is equal to transform, and then child is equal to item dot item image, and then we're going to make sure that this image keeps its correct size. So we're going to say zoom is equal to 0.5, and then alpha is equal to 0, like so. But now we need to add this transform as a child to the sprite. So for that, we're going to say item dot set child, and then we're going to pass in the transform as the parameter. But now if the visible parameter is set to true instead, we're going to say else item dot visible is equal to true, and then we're going to create a transform again. So we're going to say t is equal to transform, and then child is equal to item dot item image, and then zoom is equal to 0.5, and alpha is equal to 100, like so. And then we're going to set this transform as a child to this item. So we're going to say item dot set child, and then t instead of that. And then we need to make sure that we are redrawing the inventory sprite manager. So we're going to say inventory sm.redraw, like so. So now that we have finished this function, we're going to make sure that if the user has added a new item to the inventory, that we're checking if that item has been placed after the last inventory slot. And if it has, then we know that it was not able to fit within the 7 available slots. And in such a case, we need to make sure that the item is set to hidden until the user chooses to reveal it. And to do that, we're going to go back up into the reposition inventory items function, because that function is being called from the add to inventory function in order to position the sprites. And inside of there, we're going to make sure that we're adding the same snippet of code that we have added into the inventory arrows function, and that is namely this section right here. So we can go ahead and copy this section, and then we're going to paste it inside of the other function, and then just make sure that we rename some of the variables in order for it to work. So let's go ahead and copy this, and then we're going to scroll back up right here, and then we can go ahead and create a new line, and then go inwards in the indentations once, like so, and then we can paste this code right here, like so. And then we can go ahead and edit some of this code. So the first thing we're going to do is to remove this first condition in the first if statement. So we're going to remove this, like so. And then we can remove these outer brackets right here, like so. And then we're going to rename these cItem variables to say item instead. So we're going to say item, like so. And then inside of here as well, and then here as well, and then here as well. And then we're going to make sure that we are wrapping these if statements right here in another if statement that is going to check if the inventory sprites list has more than 0 items in it, because this function is going to run after we have removed an inventory item And if that item happened to be the last item in the inventory, then we don't want to get an error when the Ren'Py engine is trying to evaluate this condition right here, because it's going to check for an item at the index of -1 inside of the inventory sprites list, which is the last item in the list. And if that doesn't exist, then we're going to get an error. So let's go ahead and do that now. So I'm going to create a new line up here. And then we're going to say if len inventory sprites is more than 0, and then we're going to indent these if statements. And now we also need to make sure that we're making the inventory LB enabled and inventory RB enabled variables into globals as we are changing them inside of here. So we're going to say global inventory LB enabled, and then we can duplicate this and then change this to say inventory RB enabled, like so. Now, in order to make sure that the inventory arrows function is working correctly, we're going to have to do one more thing inside of the inventory events function. So we're going to scroll back up until we find it right here. And inside of this function, we're going to create another if statement. And this if statement is going to check if item 1 in this for loop is visible. And the reason why we have to check that is because if we're trying to click on one of the inventory buttons to shift the items to the left or to the right, but our mouse cursor is also at the same time on top of one of these inventory items that are hidden, then both this function and the inventory arrows function is going to run at the same time. Because inside of this function, we are checking if the current event that is happening is mouse button up, and then we're also checking if the mouse happens to be on top of the current item in this for loop. And since this is going to evaluate to true, then the code inside of this function is going to run at the same time as the inventory arrows function, and that is going to cause us some problems when the inventory arrows function is trying to reposition each of the items. So in order to prevent that, we're going to make sure that we are creating this new if statement. So we're going to create a new line above here, like so, and then we're going to say if item 1.visible is equal to true, and then we're going to indent all of the code that comes after it. So we're going to start here and then drag all the way down here, like so, to select all of this code, and then we're going to indent this once, like so. Now, in order to test if the buttons in the inventory is working correctly, we're going to have to make sure that we are adding more than 7 items to the inventory. But because we don't have that many items for this tutorial, we're going to make sure that we instead add all of the possible items that we could add to the inventory several times until we reach at least 8 items. And to do that, we're going to scroll back down into the environment events function right here. And when we're clicking on the key item in the environment, instead of just adding the key, we're going to add all of the other items several times until we reach 8 items. So I'm going to create a comma after this first item, and then I'm going to say lantern, and the next one can be matches, and then secateur, and then we'll go back to key again, and then lantern again, and then matches, and then secateur, like so. So now we have 8 items that is going to be added to the inventory when we press the key item. So now, before we go ahead and launch the game to see what this looks like, we're going to go ahead and make one small correction inside of the inventory arrows function. So we're going to scroll back down until we find it right here. And in here, when the user has clicked on the left button in the inventory, instead of saying that the item's width should be divided by inventory slot padding to get the right amount of pixels to move each inventory item with, we're going to say item width plus inventory slot padding, like so. So now this is the correct calculation that we should be using instead. So now we're going to go ahead and save our changes and launch the game to see what this looks like. So now that we're back inside of the game again, we're going to go ahead and first of all open up the inventory, and then we can go ahead and click on this key. And as we can see, we now have a bunch of items added to the inventory, and we can also see that the right button is now enabled because we have more items to the right of the last inventory slot. But the left button is still disabled because we don't have any more items to the left. So now if we were to click on this right button, we can see that more items are revealed And because we don't have any more items to reveal on this side, the right inventory button is now disabled. But instead, the left button is now enabled, so we can click to go back, like so. And as such, we can go forward and back to reveal more or less items. So now that we know that that works, we're going to go back into the code and implement some saving and loading functionality, and that is going to be the last thing that we do for this inventory tutorial series. So let's go ahead and do that now. Now the reason why we have to implement extra saving functionality to our code is because we have so much Python code in our script that changes variables in different ways. And because Python code isn't Ren'Py script, we don't really have any built-in checkpoint functionality that makes sure that the changes that we have done is going to be included in the saved game. So in order to make the changes that we have done in Python code able to be saved when the user chooses to save the game, we're going to use a Ren'Py Python function called retain after load. So everything that we have changed up until calling this function is going to be able to be loaded back up by the user with their saved file. And I'm going to leave a link into the description box below where you can read more about this function on Ren'Py's official website. Now a good place to call this function is going to be inside of our reposition inventory items function, because that function is the last function that is called whenever a new item has been added to the inventory or removed. So we're going to scroll back down until we find the function right here, and in here we're going to call this function as the last thing we do. So we're going to create a new line under here, and then we're going to go inwards 2 times like so, and then we're going to say Ren'Py dot retain after load, like so. Now the last thing we're going to add is going to be a function that is going to automatically run whenever the user is loading up a saved game. And this function we're going to use to make sure that if the user, for example, chose to save the game while they were dragging an item around on a screen, that that item is being snapped back into its original position. We're also going to make sure that if the user saved the game while a piece of dialogue was showing, then we're going to hide that piece of dialogue as well. Now you can of course use this function however you want for your game, so I recommend that you experiment to see what's going to work best for you. Now in order to tell Ren'Py to use this function whenever a game is being loaded back up, we're going to use the config variable available in Ren'Py. So we're going to scroll back down into the start label, and in here we're going to create a new line up here, and then we're going to say config dot after load callbacks. And this takes a list of functions that should run. So we're going to add 2 square brackets, like so. And then the function that we're going to run, we're going to call prepare load. And now we're going to scroll back up into the init Python block. So somewhere around here. And then here we can create this new function. So we're going to create a few empty lines, and then go inwards once in the indentations. And then we're going to say def prepare load. And the first thing we're going to do inside of this function is to make 2 variables into globals, and that is going to be the dialog dictionary as well as the inventory drag variable. So we're going to say global dialog and global inventory drag, like so. And now we're going to make sure that if we have an item that is still being dragged around on the screen as we're loading the game back up, we're going to snap it back into its original position in the inventory. So we're going to say for item in inventory sprites, and then we're going to say if item dragged is equal to item.type, and then item.x is equal to item.original x, and then the same for the y-axis. So item.y is equal to item original y, like so. And then we'll reset its set order. So we're going to say item.set order is equal to 0. And the next thing we're going to do is to make sure that we are emptying the dialog dictionary. So we're going to say dialog is equal to an empty set of curly brackets. And then we're going to set the inventory drag variable to false. So we're going to say inventory drag is equal to false. And then we're going to hide the stay screen. So we're going to say Ren'Py dot hide screen, and then character say, like so. Now before we go ahead and save our changes and launch the game, we're going to go back up into the environment events function. Right here. Now the first thing we're going to do inside of this function is to remove all of these extra items right here. Like so. And now we're going to make sure that we are setting the I overlap variable as well as the IE overlap variable to false inside of this if statement right here. And that is because at this point we no longer need these variables to be true as we have released the mouse button and we no longer need to check for overlaps. So for that we're going to create a few empty lines underneath here. And then we're going to make sure that we are in the same indentation as this for loop. So we're going to go inwards, like so. And then we're going to say global I overlap and global IE overlap. And then I overlap is equal to false and IE overlap is equal to false, like so. So now we can go ahead and save our changes and launch the game to see how this works like. So now we're going to go ahead and test to see if saving and loading is going to work correctly for our game. So I'm going to start with adding the key and the lantern to the inventory, like so. And then I'm going to open up the box with the key, like so. And now let's go ahead and save our game and load it back up to see if we still have all of the inventory items present. So I'm going to press escape on the keyboard. And then I'm going to save the game at this empty slot right here. And then I'm going to load it back up. And as we can see in the loaded version of the saved game, all of the items that we had previously picked up before we saved the game are still gone from the scene. And if we open up the inventory, we can see that we still have all of the items in our inventory. So now let's go ahead and try something else. So I'm going to drag these matches around on the screen. But instead of combining these matches with something, we're just going to leave it as it is and then press escape. And now I'm going to save the game again in this slot and then load it back up. And as we can see, that seemed to have worked as the item is no longer following the mouse around on the screen. But if we open up the inventory, we can see that it went back into its original position. Now let's go ahead and try one more thing, and that is to see if dialogue will be hidden if we save the game while the dialogue is still showing and then load it back up. So I'm going to go ahead and click on these lines, like so, and then I'm going to press escape and then save the game again and then load it back up. And as we can see, that seemed to have worked as the dialogue is now gone. So now, believe it or not, we have finally completed this tutorial series. So congratulations to those of you who have made it this far through the videos, and I hope that you found this tutorial series useful and interesting to watch. As I've mentioned before, the complete code for this tutorial series will be available for free on my Patreon page in a free post. But if you're able to, I would very much appreciate your support by joining one of the available tiers for however long you feel you're able to. And there should be a link in the description box below to the post with the script on my Patreon page. I also want to share a quick sneak peek into a fun typewriter script I'm working on that one can use in their Ren'Py games. And once it's complete, I will have it available to be purchased on my itch.io page. And I'll let you know more about it when it releases if any of you happen to be interested in getting it. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you soon again.